I'm Colin.
And I'm Eli.
And we'd like to welcome you on board the Space Cab. Space Cab is a podcast which investigates anomalous experiences, UAPs, abductions, consciousness, cryptids, mushrooms, and music through a Canadian filter. Our episode 1 is part of our interview with Ted Roe, a noted UFOologist.
Ted, Colin, was a co-founder of NARCAP, which is the National Aviation Reporting Center on Anomalous Phenomena. And he's involved with many organizations. He was so wonderfully kind and generous with his time with us, was he not?
Absolutely. He was a complete pleasure to talk to, and what a smart dude he was.
Yes, and I want to visit Alaska.
I want to visit Hawaii.
Yeah, no kidding, kid. We're going. Well, shall we play our part 1 of Ted Roe?
Absolutely. Let's start it right now, Eli.
Awesome. Okay, so you said, I am involved in UAP studies because of lifelong exposures. It's been going on very occasionally since I was a kid. I don't have a good message about it, and neither do a lot of other people. UAP information is toxic to vulnerable populations for a variety of reasons, and so are UAP exposures. Could you explain what you mean by vulnerable populations and the danger?
Well, sure. We live in a society where we recognize that a lot of us suffer from PTSD already, or CPTSD. And this kind of situation triggers some of those folks, most definitely. And there are other types of dis-ease as far as psychological conditions go that are aggravated by irresponsible engagement on this subject. And this is something that's kind of bothered me a bit over the last year or so, listening to Tim Burchett and some of the other voices in the environment right now who are not being careful about their words. You know,
okay.
I don't think they should obfuscate or not tell us things that we should need to know, but I do think that they need to be more careful about what they're saying and how they're saying it, because there's a lot of folks out there that are going to either misunderstand it or who are going to be affected by it emotionally. We have a large component of our population that kind of is more at an emotional level. And this kind of thing just kind of, it'll exacerbate misunderstandings and unnecessary responses. You know.
What are your feelings then about David Grush and disclosure? And
well, again, I think that there's a responsible way to do that. And I don't see anything wrong with the hearing or any of the testimony in general. The Oversight Committee's job is to figure out whether or not he's telling the truth. And same with the ICIG. Now, if there was nothing to the story, why would you need a cosmic clearance for the ICIG to tell you that there's nothing to UFOs?
Precisely.
So it's pretty clear there's a there. And I've been well aware of this all my life because I've seen them myself, unambiguously and up close. And I'm not sure. I can't tell you. I can't answer a lot of questions around them, but as far as the reality of them goes, oh yes, and pretty much as described. So when I hear it from pilots, when I hear it from others, I take it seriously. And what's interesting is that there's so many stories.
Yeah.
You know, so many. It's concerning. So for all these reasons, I think we have to be careful what we say and how we say it. It is toxic. The experiences themselves caused a lot of damage. It did not help my life to be exposed to UFOs. I'm just the kind of person, I have CPTSD myself, and I'm just the kind of person that'll fixate on it and basically go OCD on it, and hyper vigilant and everything. And then on top of it, I get verified good reasons to be hyper vigilant because they show up from time to time, again, unambiguously. So, I since I started NARCAP in 1999, that year I'd had a remarkable exposure. Actually, but there'd been 4 or 5 of them in the 18 months prior to that. But that year I had a really major one, and I'd written an email to the PR office at Ames Research Center in Palo Alto, NASA Ames Research Center, and said, hey, I know you guys don't study these things, but you might want to, and if you're interested, I saw something, and
And they did contact you, or they?
Yeah, actually, Dr. Richard F. Haynes showed up at our boat, at our slip where we tied off, and interviewed all of us. And one thing led to another. In about 6 months, I was the executive director of the NARCAP program, working with him and Dr. Valee and Dr. Heisch and Jim McCampbell and a lot of the great ones. And I really got kind of plucked out of nowhere. I had no reputation in ufology. I'd spent 10 years reading and trying to gather any information I could on it that had any real relevance, that was grounded, something at least you could kind of put a little weight on. And we're talking the 1990s. So compared to the way things are now, it was very sparse as far as information goes.
Wow. Could you tell us about your experience, your UAP experiences?
Well, sure. In general, the first one that I really remember was with family when I was 5 years old. We were driving down the road, and a flying saucer came out in front of the car, and everybody, of course, saw it, and it was pretty disturbing. This was in Montana, 1965.
Wow.
And I had kind of every few years for a while.
Gee.
I had one exposure when I was 18, Montana wilderness, and it was we were back on an unmaintained road back in the trees, and that was the first time I actually saw beings related to UFOs.
Did you?
Yeah, and that was it was like 1978, so nobody was talking about that. Nobody,
wow.
Nobody had a handle on that, and I surely didn't. And that was very disturbing.
Terrifying?
Yeah, I would say. You don't. There's just nothing to. You can't get a grasp on reality, And if you're somebody who's never been safe before, you're kind of lost in that space of, I'm not safe again. You're not really thinking too much about, trying to find some taxonomical understanding of what it is you're looking at. You just want to get away from it. Yeah.
Wow.
And then I had another experience when I was in the military. I was in the Coast Guard. I was on Governor's Island in New York City, right off the tip of Manhattan. There's a Coast Guard training center and an operating base there. And I'd had an incident there with one of the guys I was with, and involved missing time. We got knocked out. This thing just came right over the car in the middle of a lightning thunderstorm. They have these terrific storms in New York, and this one, we'd watched it coming from Staten Island, and apparently there was something in the cloud.
Oh my God.
So, and we woke up after that thinking, well, the electrical charge off the storm knocked us out, somehow. And it's not really what happened. I remember the car rocking.
Oh my gosh.
Banging my head on the glass, trying to right myself, but the car was at an angle, and we were sitting in a parking lot, it was nice and flat. So, things like that. And then,
wow.
But the incident that got me brought got me going with NARCAP and moving on the trajectory I'm on now happened in Oakland. And it was right in the middle of the afternoon. And we picked up 3 hours and 9 minutes over the course of the incident in about 70 seconds of linear driving time. It involved a cylinder with 2 big lights underneath it.
Oh my gosh.
And there's quite a bit to that story, and I've talked about it with others. But the whole point is that because I've seen it, I've been able to sort of lean into it without. I spent 20 years with NARCAP not talking about it.
Really?
You really couldn't. I could talk to like close friends or confidants, but I found space to do that. But we were fronting for, we had NASA scientists and engineers, we had other folks in our group, and so we were dealing with pilots, and there's a lot of bias around all of that, so we need to protect their reputation and their work environment, make sure that when we put a case out that we don't put so much information out that they can track it down to who the air crew was, manage confidentiality for our reporters, this kind of thing, and then develop enough data to be able to get some kind of a basic understanding of what these observations and incidents are about and the kind of safety issues that they represent, and then how to mitigate that. And so in doing that, there wasn't really much talking about having seen anything myself. I didn't really get a chance to talk about seeing anything myself until I sort of seized the moment right after the U.S. Office of the Director of National Intelligence released their report in 2021. In which they acknowledged that UAP are real,
right,
and that nobody really knows who they belong to, and they took a threat posture on it. About a week later, I got a call from members of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. And they invited me to present our findings at their summer conference. I had about a month to get ready for that, and then I did it. And then they called me back a month later to join a small 5-man program design team to create a UAP program at the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. So I did that for the last 2 years, running that process, and that's what led to setting up the UAP Medical Coalition. But all of it's in reaction to stigma. Stigma that wouldn't allow me to talk, stigma that says that if I have personal experience with the phenomena, I'm less credible than somebody who doesn't,
It's hard to understand that, but that is the prevailing
and if you're going to succeed, you need to understand it, and that's been what I've had to do is really read the room, I mean, there's what I know and what I've seen. There's what science acknowledges as evidence. And then there's a whole lot of other people who've seen it who don't really need to know that I have, but I can be helpful to them. And that's witnesses like pilots and air controllers or other types of witnesses. I'm getting a lot of everybody these days. And also in terms of how to speak to government and how to inform organizations about UAP phenomena, finding the proper way to discuss it rather than making it about me and what I've seen or done. I'm a hard point on the spear. I know it's real. That's why I'm able to anticipate a little bit and be successful, is because I know that when it all comes out in the wash, I'm going to be on. All I have to do is just stay consistent with the messaging and not get too radical. Society can't handle radical around this right now.
No, and it feels like they get close to wanting to talk about it in media, and then it fades. And it's hard not to feel suspicious about it.
Well, there's cycles in all of this, and the legislation and the legislative interest is rotating around the National Defense Authorization Act language. And so all of that started heating up in July with Grush and that conversation And for a while there, it looked like almost every month the whole conversation was almost unrecognizable with new information and new perspectives and new considerations and new developments. So it's been cycling around that, right? But I got a hunch that more things are going to be happening, and we'll see it level out because I'll tell you, every day that I'm in the media looking, there's articles about UFOs.
Okay, I'm glad you heard that, because honestly, in Canada, there's absolutely basically zero.
A lot of the world is this way. The stigma map is different depending on the country you're in. In the United States, we have this sort of, now there's sort of a mandate to be able to talk about it.
Yeah.
And there's a push. For example, with the AIAA program I'm with, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, that organization is 30,000 members strong.
Right.
Aviation sciences, aeronautical sciences, and engineers. So it's a professional society.
Well, I feel that in that way, the U.S. is leading things for the world. Yes.
But the other side of it is that with DOD Aero,
right,
that office, the Pentagon Office on UAP Studies, one of the presentations that came out in January of 2023, I think I sent you a copy of that.
Yes.
It's a slide deck, Sean Kirkpatrick's presentation.
Yeah, I have it. Yes.
And in it, he describes what their overarching plan is, and that is to collect data across the entire federal bureaucracy. So they're setting up reporting lines all the way through. That's why Customs and Border Patrol came up with their UAP page, and Department of Energy came up with their UAP page, and so on. Wow. Because these are federal offices that are associated with our borders and our protection, and they're trying to be transparent about UAP stuff. And in both cases, there's video. And then the other thing that they did in that presentation was to call for international partners and others to engage on their own studies.
Okay.
So there's concern, big concern. And at the top of one of those pages, it said, due to the potentially ubiquitous presence of UAP, meaning they're everywhere. And I would concur. Everything I've seen in my career watching this situation tells me that they show up everywhere.
Well, and like the video you had, I mean, we can't see them visually, but they are there.
That's right. There's that whole side of it. Sometimes camcorders will pick them up because their sensors are a little wider than the human visual range. So you'll get near infrared observations if they're in that wavelength.
Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick won't be there much longer. Is that right?
That's right. He's stepping down shortly next week.
Do we know who the new one is? Or
yeah, it's McInerney, I believe is the name. And he's stepping up. He's an unknown. Don't know a lot about that
okay.
guy.
Okay.
I do know that program was a big challenge, and standing up any program, having done a couple of them in the last couple of years, there's quite a lot to it. And I've been a little closer to seeing what was going on there and the time it took to set up to a point where they could onboard staff, where they could identify and define their goals, where they could decide on how much of the historical record they're going to rely on versus new data. All of these.
That was another strange thing, wasn't it? They were only going to talk about things from 2009 and up.
Yeah.
And why do you think that is?
Well, when we set up NARCAP, we referred to the historical record as part of our reasoning, but what we looked for was current data.
Okay.
We didn't found everything on what came before, because a lot of it was anecdote. A lot of it, commercial aviation, there's not a lot of sensing devices on the aircraft. So you don't get a lot of information. It might affect your autopilot. It might affect your communications, right? And that's generally about it. So unless whatever it is operating in those bandwidths, those things won't be affected, even when they're looking at them, So You take a fighter aircraft, on the other hand, that has a full pod of sensing devices that range from thermal to infrared to ultraviolet, and other types of wavelength and EM frequency, EM band.
Have you ever been in such a fighter pilot in a plane like that?
No, not myself, but I do know that that's where the ODNI report was drawing data from. It was from those detections,
Right.
by fighter aircraft, by military ships with broadband, full spectrum detection type analysis, and so on. So they have data. A lot of it they can't share because it reflects their own technology and stuff they don't want adversaries to know about. But our adversaries, I'm sure, know about these things as well.
They must. I mean,
Yeah.
they've pretty much said so, I thought, as well.
Well, they have. I've seen things, articles in Pravda,
Right.
that reflect, sort of echo the U.S. government posture, and they talked about it from their fighter pilot perspectives too. So, there's, these guys know math, they know technology. There's no reason to,
Get it wrong.
right. These detections too were new with the when they changed the hardware on the aircraft in 2014, I think it was. They started picking these things up.
A lot more?
Yeah. And that's where Ryan Graves and these other guys were noticing these things out in the East Coast operating areas, and then started picking them up over military conflict zones. So
what would you say your overall perception is? Is it, how dangerous is it all, would you say?
well, it's toxic. So
It's toxic.
so it's toxic in that sense. Tactically, I don't know. What I've seen, if I was going to classify it as an intelligence, if I was going to make that leap, never mind what I've seen, but if I was just going to intellectually make that jump, it's extremely efficient. And I doubt very much it would engage in war, but its capacity for surveillance and social engineering shouldn't be underestimated.
Right.
It can't be understated. They're what they can do and what they're capable of doing.
No, certainly not. Can you tell me what the beings look like?
Well, the ones that I've got experience with are just your standard, 4 to 5 foot tall gray,
Wow.
light bulb heads with the, skinny bodies. And
Skinny bodies.
I've only seen that once. Well, I've seen 2 versions of it. So for a total of 2 out of 65 years, and
Jeez.
not for very long. But it's very disconcerting.
I'm sure that's the ontological shock they speak of.
It's quite destructive. And for somebody like me, I went in every direction for, and I went down some wrongful paths in the process of,
I believe it.
You fool yourself. You start thinking, well, geez, here you are, you're somebody who's never
crazy?
really, or you're somebody who's never really been special. You know what I mean? You've just been, and all of a sudden this is going on in your life. Gee, I must be, and then
Wow.
Fortunately, that was a very short phase of my experience. I managed to get a little bit of objectivity around it and insight, and was able to turn around and look at it and say, now, wait a minute, just because it happened to you doesn't mean it's a good thing.
Wow. How do your family feel about it?
Well,
Have they all had multiple sightings as well then, or?
Well, some of my family have seen things.
Some.
Some of my family were with me when I saw things.
Right, when you were 5.
Yeah, when I was a child. However, there's a whole chunk of my family that doesn't feel that way. And
Sure.
I'm not generally accepted comfortably in that space. There's a stigma with all of this, and having, and that's part of the issue when you deal with people who are emotional, whose perspective is more emotional based. They will reject you often. And it's forced me to be more insightful and careful with everybody. This isn't something that's easy for people to deal with, and it isn't something that every person ever deals with.
Yeah, that's
and only for some of us who deal with it is it really, really, really difficult. And again, there are stories though of not nice things associated with abduction phenomena and exposure to UFOs and their occupants. And David Jacobs goes into it. Carla Turner goes into it. Others.
I know that David Jacobs, I haven't read any. I have a book that I haven't read yet, but I did read, or I listened to on Audible, John Mack's book, Abductions, but he felt more worried about it for people. Is that safe to say?
Well, it kind of went both ways with Dr. Mack. He on one hand he felt cautionary, but on the other hand he kind of thought that we were getting good messages and good vibes from well-intentioned non-human intelligences. I kind of beg to differ myself, but again, it a lot of these guys, if they haven't been chased home by it, they're dealing with it with sort of an intellectual perspective, and it might not carry enough of the emotional charge that it needs to have a good, clear perspective on it. But I've been way too close to these things, and it's not something I'd care to repeat. It's not something I wish on others. And a lot of the stories that other people have to say about what happens when they got close aren't nice stories. They're not good things, not things that you want to happen to your loved ones. And the fact is, we have an issue with boundaries right now. I mean, they come right down to ground level. They lay hands on people.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's
well, they might take your eggs. They might take your sperm,
and so on. You know what I mean? They might take you. You know, Carla Turner's tales were ghastly, but not necessarily unbelievable. That's how little we know, but the point is that none of that should be going on. You know, respect for boundaries, I imagine, is a universal biological expectation wherever life is. However it expresses itself, it's got boundaries. It says, okay, I end here, you begin there, right? And you stay there and I stay here, and it's all good, you know, but you don't cross into me and I won't cross into you.
But is that because they might be of hive mind? They have simply a different, they don't have feelings in the same way that humans are very emotional.
It's very hard. If you want to be honest and accurate about dealing with non-human intelligences, off-world non-human intelligences, you really don't want to project on them. What you want to do, in my opinion, is you look at what they do. And
I mean,
if that's acceptable. Go ahead, Colin.
No, I just want to interject here, but I mean, in some cases, that seems like the prime directive. You know, the Star Trek, was that Star Trek?
Yeah,
you know,
so.
like just don't interfere with the other people. And I'm not sure that like an extraterrestrial or trans-dimensional intelligence would work along those same principles. You know, it's like, whoa, don't go in and steal their sperm. It's like, okay, this is a good experiment. I mean, but again, that's just really, really in very human terms. And I mean, if these are trans-dimensional, trans-spatial, extraterrestrial intelligences, like I think you know, sort of you can throw out the rule book.
Well, and that, so again, there's no real grounds to come up with excuses for them. What you really need to do is set your defense. You know, take a tactical position and ask yourself, do you want this going on? And if you wouldn't allow other human beings to do it, you need to draw a line and say you don't want anybody doing it. And force communication, force interaction, you know, and see where that gets you versus just being preyed upon. and it's not really a message of fear here, because it's just facing reality. If you don't want this to happen to your children, if you don't want your family being treated this way, then you have to say no. And what happens when you say no?
That's what I'd like to know. Do you have any thoughts about that?
It generally, it doesn't stop. When you talk to people who've had negative experiences with all of this, it doesn't stop by them demanding it stop or begging them to stop.
No.
Stop. It doesn't stop. And the only thing I know that might do it is grounding yourself in objective awareness and insight to a point where you kind of set yourself at a level that's a little more equal to them. You may not be an intellectual equal, but you're not, a non-player. You're there. You're not
right.
Livestock. You're not livestock.
Right.
And that's.
I think they can feel, if you can feel sure of yourself.
That's right. Yeah.
But I think they also know if they have you and you're in fear.
Yeah. There's really no justification. You know what I mean? You just can't really, and I've done a lot of gymnastics around all this stuff too, because who wants to just be negative about it?
Me too.
Right.
Yeah. And we kind of vacillate. I come from the 70s, and it was a very hippie counterculture, let's be nice about it. And
right.
But at the same time, I couldn't presume to stand on a podium and tell 8 billion people this is a good situation, not knowing what I know, not experiencing what I've experienced, So there's
so has any of it been a good experience for you?
Well, only in the sense that it's driven me. It's pushed me to limits I didn't think I could get to. I'm one of the few folks in mainstream ufology that actually moved up from ufology to the mainstream.
Right.
That actually kind of made that transition into a, mainstream organization doing mainstream work. And not many of us have. And there's a reason for that. It's a matter of knowing the room, knowing what people are ready to hear. People are ready to hear you talk about. You have to be careful and know the time. If you really want to make change, you can't just let it all hang out. You have to tactically engage, look at what's going on, and make decisions, active decisions on what to say and when to say it and who to say it to. When I spoke at that conference in 2021, I actually mentioned one of my observations that I'd had in Hawaii. But I was able to put it out in a technical context so that it wasn't, you got to believe me, I saw one of these. It was, okay, this happened, it looked like this, it behaved like this. I'm talking to engineers, and I was able to posit some things. Okay, it had this glow around it. Well, I suggested that might be ionization, and that it's emitting RF, and that it's doing it in frequencies that are consistent with some atmospheric constituents. And they got animated in the chat channel, talking about what that could be and how that could happen. So, I was even then when I presented our findings, I had to do it with a straight face and level eyes and without emotion, and carry the information to people who like information, who like it raw. Engineers and research scientists. Speak their language to the ability that I can.
You have some science background, not particularly, no?
No, but I've been administrating for them and I've been mentored by them.
Yes.
So I've picked up a lot of what, and I'm accepted in environments where they occur,
Absolutely.
But I've administrated, I've been running programs, and that led to the next program that I set up, which was UAP Medical Coalition. And I did that in May of 2022. After cogitating for a couple of years, on it. But as I saw, we began onboarding people to the AIAA program, and all these were highly credentialed people, highly motivated, not terribly experienced with UAP, you know. And I was kind of watching them and how their focus was and what they were interested in doing, and how the conversation was so much on nuts and bolts. A lot of desire to understand the how, you know, and the goal there is to develop modalities to detect these things so they can be used in the aviation environment for either spaceborne or airborne or ground-based detection.
I think that's so important. We need to have it come from the top down and move around and surround all aspects. Like, let's let the information be known, and let's have protocols around it.
Well, and that's the thing, you know, we at UAP Med, we recognize that it's policy that drives activity. So we need to strike the policy level. And so our focus is on the professional societies and psychology and medicine, and wherever psychology and medicine overlaps with the social infrastructure, right? So police, first responders, EMS, fusion centers, you know, this kind of thing. And then how does that dock with the federal mandate of reporting, you know, through Department of Homeland Security, if it's police, for example. And how do you move when you've got UAP that are intermittently detected on radar?
Right.
And you really kind of depend on that Mark 1 eyeball, you know,
wow,
looking at it right now. And how do you get that data from that guy up the chain and into the DoD response perspective, right? How do you move it quickly, right? And how are you able to verify it so that you know that it's relatively reliable information, and so on? You have to tighten up all these processes all the way up the line, and that's something UAP Med's focused on, amongst other things.
Did you happen to listen to the I think it got re-released in full, the Gary Nolan Coulthard interview?
I didn't, but I'll have to tell you, I don't tend to focus on anything that anybody else is doing out there. I've kind of independence and neutrality is how you succeed, you know.
Okay.
And so in the same way, I don't cast aspersions.
Don't muddy the waters, sort of feeling.
Well, yeah, and to stick on your own track, you know, there's something particular we're trying to do here. Don't really care about what, you know, it's relevant, you know, and we overlap. I talk to people that are in that circle, you know, fairly regularly through UAP Med, but what they're doing is separate and different from what we're doing, you know, and so we're a coalition, right? So we keep a network. And we have a visible network, and then we have sort of an invisible network that's much bigger, that involves people who would rather not be directly publicly associated, but are, you know, within our scope, and vice versa.
Right.
So there's a lot of things going on right now, and the whole point is to help society adapt. That ontological shock you were talking about, that can be at the individual level, but it can damage families, communities, society in general. How do you mitigate that? You know, how do you handle the messaging around it? And then what are the policies, protocols, and procedures that are actively engaged? How do you, when you have a UAP incident, you know, over a neighborhood, for example, how much of that neighborhood do you want to contain and make sure people get medically and psychologically screened?
Right.
You know, to protect them, brain damage from field effects, this kind of
thing. Right.
There's this thing the government's looking at called anomalous health incidents, and the language is kind of moving towards including UAP exposures in the conversation openly. I know that it's kind of been implying that for a while, but they're getting a little more transparent about it by steps. And the issue there is that we have government officials who are exposed to these things and who incur traumatic brain injuries of kind of unusual types. And some of these things are preceded by unusual observations, shall we say. So makes you wonder what those unusual observations are, and how much of that falls right dead center of the UAP conversation. What it means that our diplomatic corps, our military corps, are vulnerable. And what exactly is going on when they do that? If they do that, if there's a they and they're doing that, what is it actually happening? What is the mechanism?
I suspect there is a they and that they are, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing. I'm watching all of these. I've got theoretical physicists and engineers and defense contractor people and NASA people and everything in our AIAA program, and I'm watching them kind of working through the technical side of all of this. But the other side is the psychosocial impact and what happens when they stop thinking about how these things do this and they start dwelling on why.
Right.
And the capacity of the other team, in my opinion, is great when it comes to surveillance and social engineering. And these incidents, these anomalous health incidents, may be related to social engineering kind of activities.
Okay. Hey, I'm going to interject here again, Ted, because when you say the other team, um, I mean, I realize why you see that UAPs are a potential threat to. Hey, I'm going to take a plane to Mexico sometime soon. If it buzzes by me and affects my brain. Okay, that's a like a serious thing. Um, However, are these? Is this a real existential threat? I'm getting the feeling that you feel this is not just like, hey, they might crash into our plane, but these guys, girls, sorry, there's that gender thing. Uh, these beings, transdimensional or whatever, um, are we just don't know what they're doing, and they are a real. Hey, uh, what you recently said suggested to me like the Havana syndrome. Okay, we had Canadian diplomats affected by that. Um, are there energy weapons that can disrupt the brain, or
Well,
is yeah, go ahead.
I should have said, when I mentioned anomalous health incidents, that's also known as Havana syndrome.
Okay.
And so everything that I was talking about there was really kind of associated around the Havana syndrome and developments in our government to engage on that, and how that may be associated to with because these incidents are sometimes preceded by unusual perceptual situations. It may involve observations of UAP. So these guys could be dealing with the incident we dealt with the field investigators on the Long Island shore that were paralyzed by a UAP while they were doing their research. It's an example of the kinds of incidents that are possible. And it kind of demonstrates in that case, these things were not visible to the naked eye. But they were documented through infrared cameras. And
then their glands got swollen.
Yeah, right. They had lymphedema, and there was some argument whether that.
And his heart murmur.
Yeah, and it could have been, a radiological
and the blood pressure
exposure, but I don't know. I don't think it was. I think that, and we've got a group of neuroscientists who are looking at this case right now and looking at it in the context of other cases that have had similar reporting. And there are other cases that talk about these types of things where they were paralyzed, they were knocked down, where they couldn't move. But they saw the UAP first, right? And then they experienced this. So we know they're there, and we've had some meetings with these guys. We're talking about putting together some papers that sort of look at how people could have been paralyzed based on the data that these field investigators got. And just for your listeners, what happened was they were watching something. It was about 1,000 yards offshore and maybe 75 yards off the water. And while they were watching it, they painted it with an infrared emitter, and it reacted and deployed a ball of light towards them underwater. And they documented it coming up to them. And then next thing you know, their legs were out from under them. They turned to run and it knocked them down. Went through their camera.
Well, it was just one fellow, I think, that couldn't get out. And then the other, his brother.
It was both of them.
They both could not?
For a moment. Yeah, it was both of them for a moment.
Okay.
And it's interesting. If they hadn't been looking at the UAP through the camera, they wouldn't necessarily have associated one with the other. But there again, they wouldn't have been painting it with the infrared emitter either.
Right. So was that a good thing for them to do or not?
Don't poke the bear.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. Yes, it is poking the bear, right?
Yeah. And
what are your thoughts? Okay, sorry, continue.
I think it's risk behavior. I don't think it's wise. And if I was telling first responders, in a tactical situation, what not to do, it would be don't point the laser sight on your pistol at a UAP,
right?
Any more than you pointed at any person, or any device. You don't do that, unless you're right at the edge of whatever it is lawful to do so, and other things, don't other types of light, don't point things at them. Evacuate, get away from them. If you can see them and there's people around and underneath, gather them up and go away from there.
Wow.
Just basic stuff. And then
because proximity is more dangerous.
I would imagine so. And then the other side of it is to medical and mental health screening. And we're working on developing diagnostics around that. UAP Med, to help sort of introduce the conversation to the medical and mental health community. They'll pick it up and argue with it and come up with their own good ideas and
way to do it. Yeah,
and their journal entries and all that stuff. But to open the door, and just say, hey, we've got this. This data looks like this. Government's taking this thing seriously. Medicine and psychology needs to as well. A lot of people are presenting with these stories about UFO exposures, and there should be some acknowledgement of that and some engagement for those people so that they don't suffer from stigma, against their jobs or against anything else. So the whole point is to change the environment for those of us.
Yeah, it is. It's letting people know it is real.
Right. And I'm not judging.
Not crazy. Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of narratives around this. They say, oh, they're demons, they're this, they're that, they're the other thing. I've got my own opinions on all of that, but it's not my job to undermine faith or to argue with where people get their authority from. It's mainly to make sure that those authorities, whoever they are, whether they're faith-based or others, are carrying information that's helpful to their adherents, to the people that follow them.
Mm-hmm.
So that the information is helpful to them and allows them to be empowered and remain human.
Yes.
Focus on their humanity.
Wow. Thanks very much, Ted, for those insights. That was utterly fascinating and gripping. The second half we will have available to you soon. Please follow us on Spotify, and you can reach us also at our blog address, spacecapblog.wordpress.com. Also, we're on Insta, spacecab_2001. Spacecab wants to remind you to comment, include yourself in our polls, and let us know what you would like to hear.